Strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm your host, Marcia Teal, and I am so glad that you could tune in, join us today, whether you're listening on the iHeartRadio app, local Southeast Florida radio, or maybe watching it live stream. We are here in Boca Raton, Florida, so you might be actually watching us on your smartphone or your computer. Anyway, you're here. I'm glad that you are. We have another wonderful program for you today. You know, we talk a lot about caregiving, trials and tribulations. Lots of great advice is given on the show, and that's the reason for the show, to help caregivers, to help family caregivers, caregivers that are doing a job they never expected they would have to do. Unpaid family caregivers, usually a spouse, an adult child, even a friend. And caregiving is tough, no matter how you slice it. It's something that you kind of learn as you go. So this show was created over 4 years ago to help that family caregiver and other people who are interested in learning more about caregiving and more about dementia, because that is our focus. Now, caregivers all across the world are caring for people with dementia, but they're also caring for people with other physical ailments. So a lot of the things that we talk about, of course, is specific to dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease-related dementia, vascular dementia, frontal temporal lobe type of dementia, or maybe you're a caregiver for someone and you're learning a lot from the program how to take care of yourself, not necessarily, to know how to take care of someone with dementia, but how to take care of yourself while you're caring for that person who can no longer care for themselves. So we talk a lot to professionals, people that can help guide you. This is a great resource. Elder law attorneys talking about financial issues. We have social workers talking about the emotional issues. Geriatric care managers talking about maneuvering the system and how to navigate your way through each stage of dementia. We have actual caregivers who have walked in your shoes and are walking that same path. And there's no better way to learn than from someone who's been there, of course. And all the professionals that come onto the program have something to offer. They care about the caregiver. They want to help, and you can learn from them. Most of our professionals have been in the business many, many, many years, so their expertise is invaluable. And I try to ask the questions of that professional, the questions that you would ask if you could sit in front of each and every one and had that opportunity. So the show has been so successful, and we have helped so many people. So one of the things that we do that is very, very valuable is give away the 36-hour day book. Now, this book is sometimes referred to as the Bible of caregiving. It is a wonderful book that's written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mays, and it's in its 5th edition, which means it's a great book that's always being revised and bringing up to date with any new information regarding research or techniques. And this book is yours just for the asking because you're watching this program. So this is a book that I would highly recommend. It is a book to have on your shelf, on your coffee table, on your nightstand, and you can pick it up. You don't have to read it front to back. You don't have to read it all at once. You can pick and choose the chapters. But this book is so important, and the reason that we really stress this book for caregivers is because it has about 18 different chapters, and the chapters are highlighted by the issues that caregivers are going to be going through, that they need to know about, to be prepared. And that's the key, to be prepared. Even if you don't have to execute a plan, the best thing you can do as a caregiver is to have a plan. So, for example, the first chapter in this book is dementia. What is dementia? And where do you go from here once you get that diagnosis of dementia? Chapter 2, getting medical help for the impaired person. Who do you go to and what kind of professional do you need to see? Chapter 3 is characteristic problems of dementia. Now, these imply brain changes, behavior changes, and personality changes, overreacting, catastrophic reactions, and combativeness. I know a lot of caregivers are afraid of their spouse because they become combative, and we've talked about that on the program before. Not everyone that has dementia is going to be combative. Matter of fact, I've seen some places or some people at times where they change their behavior from a negative or aggressive normal behavior into something that is more docile, and it's goes back and forth. There's no rhyme or reason for it, which makes this disease so insidious, because there's not one type of person that you can basically describe that has Alzheimer's disease, because everyone has their own type of behavior, their own idiosyncrasies, and you can't just peg them. That's what makes it so difficult. Chapter 4, problems in independent living. When does a person need to give up their job? When can they no longer drive safely? When can a person not live alone anymore? Which is a big one, especially here in South Florida, where a lot of retirees are, and their adult children maybe live up north, and they really don't know what's going on, because a lot of people with dementia are really good at manipulating and covering up the real situation. Chapter 5, problems arising in daily care. So we're talking about hazards in the house, hazards in the car, smoking, nutrition, mealtime, preparation for mealtime, weight loss, what is important, exercise, those kinds of things. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to keep them active and busy and have meaningful activities? So this book talks about that. Personal hygiene, the bathing, the dressing, the grooming, the oral hygiene, all of this is discussed with lots of great tips in here. Incontinence, that's a big one. The adult diapers, the adult depends. When is the time to, go to the depends, and when is the time to go further than that, as far as having someone helping you if you're not comfortable with making those personal hygiene changes and helping that person. Then you have the medical problems, the pain, the falls, the injuries, dehydration, constipation, the medications, the dental problems, the vision problems, the hearing problems, the seizures possibly, the death of an impaired person, the cause of the death, hospice care. Everything is covered here as far as medical problems and tips and recommendations for you. Chapter 7 is behaviors, problems of the behavior. Concealing the memory loss. This is a big one. A lot of people don't want to come out and share. They're embarrassed. They feel guilty, whatever the reason. They conceal it. Sometimes they conceal it from other people. Sometimes they actually conceal it from their family, which can be very difficult, especially when you need that family for support. Problems also include sleep disturbance and night wandering, losing things, hoarding things, hiding things. This can be a big thing, especially when things start to go missing, expensive jewelry and money and things like that. Where did it go? And just to be prepared that this could be an issue. Repeating a question over and over and over. Repetition in actions, doing the same thing over and over. Distractibility, taking things, forgetting phone calls, stubbornness and uncooperativeness, and using medications to manage these behaviors. Is that good or is it not so good? Chapter 8 is problems of mood, depression, complaints about their health, suicide, I want to die, just take me out and shoot me. Sometimes we hear that. Alcohol or drug abuse, apathy and listlessness, remembering feelings, anger, irritability, anxiety, nervousness, restlessness, false ideas, suspicions, paranoia, and hallucinations. Chapter 9, special arrangements if you become ill. If you, the caregiver, become ill, what are your arrangements and how are you going to make arrangements and take care of that person while you're recovering? Chapter 10, getting outside help. Lot of help here on Chapter 10 with help from friends, neighbors, finding the services that you need and the kinds of services. Are you going to have someone come in the home? Who is it going to be? A friend, a neighbor, a home health company? Maybe adult daycare would be something that you could consider. So respite care is another option. It talks about these. If you don't know about these things, you're going to learn about it in this book and by watching the show on a regular basis. Number 10, that was getting the outside help. Research also is discussed in there. Chapter 11, you and the impaired person as parts of a family. So changes in roles. Are you the wife anymore or are you the caregiver? Are you the husband or does your wife think that you're her son or her father? And so you're changing roles. And you need to learn how to adapt because you'll never win an argument with a person with dementia, so don't even try. When you're not the primary caregiver, what can you do to help? And this would be for other people, extended family, friends, neighbors. You're not the primary, but you can help too. And these are ways listed that you can do that. Chapter 12, how caring for an impaired person affects you. You, the caregiver, the emotional reactions, anger, embarrassment, helplessness, guilt, laughter, love, and joy. Yes, it is possible. Grief, depression, isolation and feeling alone, worry, being hopeful and being realistic, mistreating the confused person. And then, of course, physical reactions, fatigue and illness of the primary caregiver. Sexuality, if your spouse is impaired, how is that going to affect you as the caregiver? And when the person that you've cared for dies. So it goes on and on and on. Chapter 13, caring for yourself. 14, for children and teenagers. 15, financial and legal issues. 16, nursing homes and other arrangements. 17, brain disorders and causes of dementia. And finally, Chapter 18, research in dementia. The reason that I went through these chapters briefly to highlight some of the important topics contained in this book is because Dr. Peter Rabins, who wrote this book, is giving a free caregiving seminar coming up September 17th, 2019 at the Marriott West Palm Beach and City Place on Okeechobee Boulevard. Now, this is a limited seating event. It is sponsored by Arden Court's Memory Care Community of West Palm Beach and Delray Beach, and you do need to RSVP in order to attend as soon as possible. So if you'd like to attend, this is a great way to learn all about the 36-hour day. The topics: meet Dr. Peter Rabens. He'll be there in person, giving all his wise advice and help to caregivers. It does start at 8 o'clock in the morning. 8 to 8:30 is registration. There is a complimentary breakfast included, and the seminar is from 9 to 10:30 a.m. To RSVP, call 561-688-9999. Again, 561-688-9999. That's the Arden Courts Memory Care Community of West Palm Beach. They are taking the reservations for this special event. So call today. Again, seating is limited. This is a great event, a free event. You won't want to miss it. And when we come back from our commercial break, we're going to be having a special guest here, and you won't want to miss that either. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
How much? We are back. Caregiver Solutions Info Show. Thanks for staying with us. I have a special guest in the studio with me today. Her name is Lorette Bagley. Lorette is a family caregiver. She is a wife who unfortunately has a husband who has been diagnosed with dementia. And we're going to be talking to her. She's going to be sharing her story, the struggles, but also the successes that she has encountered along the way. So, hi, Lorette. Thank you for
Hi,
coming
Marcia.
today.
So happy to be here with you.
I am so glad to be in your presence for the second time. The first time we actually met was in Tallahassee, on our way to
Yes.
Tallahassee
Yes.
for an advocacy trip
Yes.
and meeting the legislators to try to make more awareness and get more money funded for dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yes.
But today you're here to tell your personal story, and your husband's name is Carl, right?
Yes, yes.
And so let's just start by talking a little bit about Carl. How old is Carl right now?
Carl just turned 69.
Okay.
So he's pretty young.
Pretty young. So what is his actual official diagnosis?
It's early onset Alzheimer's.
Early onset.
Yes.
So how long ago was he diagnosed?
He was diagnosed about 3.5 years ago.
Okay. And what was Carl's life's work? What did he do for a living?
Carl has done many things. He has a technical background. As a matter of fact, he spent many years working for United Technologies and their research division. And then when he came down here, because of all the layoffs with Pratt & Whitney, he decided to do something that was more his passion, which is cars. And so, believe it or not, he got into car sales.
Okay.
And worked at a Toyota dealership for many years.
Good to do your passion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, makes life better, makes your job easier, I always say.
Absolutely.
So, life is good. Now you're working.
I've actually retired.
You just retired recently.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Okay.
And it has been life-changing, obviously. And the retirement was because of Carl's health.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit then and get the timeline
Okay.
and get to the beginning of this story, because at the time you were working,
Yes.
I'm sure Carl was working.
Yes.
What were some of the first telltale signs that you noticed that maybe something wasn't right?
Yes. Remember I said he was in car sales for many years. So he definitely knew how to use a calculator. And one day we were just having conversations about bills, and I said, honey, just add this up for me. And I saw him with a calculator and just this blank look on his face. And I thought to myself, that's strange. It's like he didn't know what to do with it. So that stays in my mind because I think that's one of the very first times that I noticed something was different.
Then did you call him out on it?
Not really. I think he just, I sort of giggled and said, what's going on? Don't you, know how to use the calculator? But at the time, I didn't really make much of it. But that was it. Just now that I look back, that's definitely a memory that stayed.
Okay. Then what happened after that? I'm sure there were other little
absolutely.
signs.
Well, actually, he had left car sales and was now driving a bus, transit, and loved his job. And what happened, and I understand sometimes there could be a catastrophic event in your life that may act as a catalyst. And so if I look back, there was a situation where there was an accident. He was definitely cleared. There was no accountability on his part. Apparently a bicyclist veered into the path of the bus because, they have cameras on the bus, so they were able to see that. And I will say that was probably the life-changing moment. He knew, he had heard that it was not his fault, so he knew it wasn't his fault. But I think that as humans, we never want to know that somebody was hurt, and we were present. And even though he, had no fault, I think that that's when I noticed some changes.
So did that change his personality? Did you see
Somewhat.
some maybe depression?
I saw some paranoia. He felt that people were getting on the bus now who knew this person, and they were somehow looking to do him harm. And initially, as a spouse, obviously you want to be supportive. But I thought, this is kind of interesting, because why would they want to harm you you
So
know.
you, at this point, you're still confused.
I'm
Why
still
is he
confused.
thinking this?
Exactly. And so it did come to the point where management stepped in and suggested that he take some time off. And they were very supportive in the sense that they suggested that he, get some psychological therapy, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a couple, we really didn't know exactly what was going on. The other event in our life at the time was that my mother had had a stroke just literally a month before. So we were already dealing with that. And now here comes this situation. And so I'm thinking, well, our lives have just been turned upside down a little bit. But then, even though he was now on administrative leave, I noticed that there was still bouts of paranoia, bouts of he's always been very cautious, but he would say to me, now you be careful, with and then I thought, okay, something's really going on. So I was glad that his company was suggesting that he, got some therapy and all of that.
So did you take him up on that suggestion?
Yes, absolutely.
So what was the first thing that you did?
Well, as I said, he was getting therapy, but here's what happened. He went back to work, and things were not getting better. It just so happens that at that point he made a decision then that he did not want to drive for a living anymore. And I thought actually it was a win-win situation because I thought, well, it's causing stress, not knowing that there were all these other issues that were going on. And at the time, I'll be honest, he was my rock. He was absolutely my rock with my mom. And because Mom had had a stroke, they suggested that she needed 24/7 care, which was kind of tough.
Did you
me.
do that?
Not willingly at first, but at the suggestion of the nursing home and the social worker, we went from just being in a rehab situation to more so of a long term. So we were definitely going through a transition.
So you're dealing with Mom
I'm
and her
dealing with Mom.
stroke issues at the
Yes.
same time now. Carl's got his issues, and you're sort of in between. I can
Yes,
imagine you were
yes.
feeling very overwhelmed at that point.
And then he said to me that I was not being supportive because when I would I guess I was in management at the time and I sort of had my management hat on when he would come home and say, well, someone was on the bus and I think they were out to get me or whatever. And I would, of course, probe a little bit and say, well, why do you think that that happened? And I thought, no one's really trying to hurt you. And then he would say, you're not being supportive. You're like the company. They think that I'm making this all up.
Yeah, so now there's a little bit of conflict
Yes.
between the two of you that's
Absolutely.
caused by all of his paranoia and some of his issues. So when did you actually get an official diagnosis?
So at this point, this was, just to give you a chronological timeline, this was 2015. Well, actually, when the stroke happened, it was 2011. So we had several years. And then he did go ahead and take the retirement and was home for a while. Now, the husband that I knew was always very active, very social, and involved in a lot of different things. And he lost his enthusiasm to do things. He didn't want to do any kind of part-time work. I suggested taking a computer course. None of that appealed to him. So I noticed that he was just getting, I don't want to use the word depressed, but I think at that time he was a little down and just wanted to kind of sit around the house, which was very unusual
No
for him.
initiative or motivation?
Exactly. So there was some signs there that just seemed very out of character. Just to fast forward a little bit, another catastrophic event was that he lost an aunt who was a second mom to him. She had helped raise him. And so we went to Connecticut for the funeral. And here he was, having grown up in Hartford most of his life, and he got lost trying to find his way around the city. And I think, as any spouse would do, I was covering for him. And I was like, well, he hasn't been there in a while. But I think some of the family realized something's just not
adding up here.
adding up. What's going on? And this was the biggie. When we came back home, he did two things that was extremely out of character. He went and opened up a new savings account in his name only. and bought a new car.
And bought a new car
Bought a
after he
new
gave
car.
up driving for
Yes.
living. He bought a new car
He bought
without
an-
discussing with
without
you.
discussing. And in all of our years of marriage, we had done everything.
And how many
together.
years have you been married?
I've been married. We've been married 28 years.
So
Around this time, we're in the low 20s, and so it was just so shocking because we had done everything together, and he not only was defensive with it, he was just, well, I'm a grown man. I can do whatever I want. So now I'm seeing all these personality changes, and I'm saying something's not right. But I still didn't know, how to label.
So what took it to happen before
Family. Okay, so there
did you
was
get some pressure from other people?
Here's what happened. He started. We had always been a very close knit couple, very almost like best friends. Not only were we married, but we were very just. Our marriage was easy, and then he started sharing with his family how I was becoming somewhat controlling and different things that didn't exactly put me in the best light. And it to the rest of the family, it came off that we were having marital issues.
Because they
And
believed him.
of course, of course. Why wouldn't they? That was his family. And so then, of course, the car was a huge issue, the new car that he had bought. And because I wanted him to take the car back. And at the time, I knew enough as far as what I was seeing to ask for some help. So at the time, I had a conversation with the VA and asked, if we could get some tests done or whatever.
Because he's a veteran.
Because he's a veteran. And at the time, we did have an appointment with a therapist.
That was a good thing.
That was a good thing. But what happened was because he was sharing with his family that we were having problems, of course, as family would do, they said, well, maybe you guys need a little time from each other. They thought some time apart is what we needed.
Really?
And so he left home.
Where did he go to live with other family?
Yes, he went to live with other family. He has sisters also in Florida.
And was this before he got to go into the therapy?
Yes.
Okay, so now it's delayed
So now
even
it's
longer.
Exactly. And I'm just beside myself because I don't know what's going on. And so I reached out to his sisters, which I was very close to them at that time, and said, we need to do what I thought was an intervention. And at that time, I think they were just besides themselves. They didn't know what was going on. So they were at the mindset where, well, we can't really tell him what to do. He is a grown man after all. So needless to say, he left home. And that was devastating.
So he's running away from himself.
Yes. And I think the only way I can sum that up is he knew something wasn't right. But of course, he didn't know what it was.
Right,
He just
and
knew.
he's afraid,
Yes.
probably deep down inside, knowing that he can't do the things he used to do, or he can't explain why he feels the way he feels. So now he's running away from you, from himself, from the therapy that you're trying to get for him.
Exactly.
And how long did that last?
That lasted a couple of months. I was without my husband Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. And it was, it was such a change because, like I said, we had always done everything together. So what I was getting now was that he would say to me things like, "Oh, I'm not coming back. Sell the house." And one of the things that was known, not just by family, but our friends, is when my mother moved in with us, I was so proud of him because for a man to let his mother-in-law move in.
Yeah, good guy.
So all he wanted out of that was a man room, like a man cave. And I used to joke that it was the smallest room in the house with the largest TV, of course, right? But so everyone kept saying, Carl left his man room? That was a big deal. And the fact that he says he's not coming back home, it was just really shocking to me. I just couldn't understand that. But then I would get some phone calls from him, which were totally contradictory, because then I'd hear, I'm going to come home and get my clothes. And then 2 seconds later, I'm not coming back. You can give my clothes away.
So he was a little bit irrational.
Yes, yes. And I had no idea what was
So
really
what
going
did
on.
you do? Because this couldn't go on.
I will say my faith really played a big part. I reached out to my church family at that point and shared what was going on, and I was very, very blessed to have a lot of support from them. And of course, when your friends and family tell you they're praying for you, I strongly believe that prayer works. So I remember I was at an ecumenical service. It was a Wednesday night, and a friend said to me, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm hanging in there." And she said, "Just hang in there. And I think that, you look good, and God will bless you." And I totally put my faith and trust there. The very next morning, I got a phone call from Carl saying that he wanted to come home. And his voice sounded different. I heard remorse. I heard something that I hadn't heard in the last couple of months. I heard someone who was just feeling a sense of, I miss my home. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, "But honey, you've left home. You left your wife, you left your home. We had a little dachshund." I said, "You even left your dog." And he said, "But I really want to come home." And I thought, okay, something's different. And I said, "If you really want to come home, then, go ahead." And I didn't know what his capability was as far as driving home or anything, but I just put my faith and trust and said a little prayer, and he actually drove back home. Now, what was interesting was this was a new car, so when he got to the development, he could not get in because there was no gate code on the car. And so I remember meeting him at the gate, and I said, "Are you hungry?" And he said, "Yeah." And we went and sat at Duffy's, believe it or not.
Restaurant? Mm-hmm.
The restaurant for a couple of hours and just talked.
So eventually you took him to the doctor.
Well,
and
I gave him an ultimatum while we were sitting there. I said, "If you really want to come back home, this is what you need to do."
Well, good for you, because, you had to figure out what's going on with him.
So the very next morning, we headed up to the VA, made some appointments, and this was February, and they ran some tests. Mainly, I know they had done some CAT scans and different things, but the test that was the most confirming was the PET scan. Mm-hmm. And so that was really huge.
So when the doctor looked at all the test results and it came time to sit and tell you.
And we got the diagnosis.
And Carl was sitting there with you?
Carl was sitting there with me.
How did he take that?
Not well. And as a matter of fact, the doctor had said to him, "Do you mind if your wife is here? Because it's always good to have family." And he said, "Oh, no problem at all." And then when he heard the diagnosis, he said to the doctor, "She needs to leave." And I said, and I wasn't offended, because I felt like I had closure at that time.
Because you finally found out what was causing all of these weird things with Carl, and it was early onset dementia.
Early onset Alzheimer's.
The dementia, the Alzheimer's type.
Yeah. And Marsha, what was so strange is I remember I walked out of the doctor's office, and if you had asked me at that time where was the chapel in the VA, I could not have told you. But that's where I headed. And I remember I was in the chapel praying, and I came out of the chapel, and Carl was standing there with the doctor. This was a psychiatrist, and the doctor said, "I'd like to talk to you." And Carl looked at me and said, "It's your turn." And I went in, and I remember the doctor was apologetic and said, "I'm sorry you had to leave." And I said, "No, because now I know what's going on. Now we can move forward." Mm-hmm. And I said to both him and the doctor at that point, I said, "We're a team. And whatever's going to happen here, whatever happens to him,
Happens
he's my
to you
husband.
too.
It happens to me too."
Yeah.
So to fast forward, since this was now 2016, the spring of 2016, so since that time we have been following up with the primary physician and also with the mental health clinic of the VA. So he does see everything from a psychiatrist to also the physician's assistant that helps with meds. And we've come a long way. It's been a long journey.
Yeah. And then in between all of that, once he did get the official diagnosis,
Yes.
ultimately you retired to spend more time and help take care of Carl,
Yes.
right?
Well, what happened, and this is again, I chuckle now looking back because I've had a few situations where I'm thinking no one would ever believe this. But what happened was Christmas of December of 2016, I took a couple of weeks off. I took FMLA because I wanted to see how well he was coping by himself. I will tell you that I worked for a large wireless provider. I was in what you call corporate security, which means that we were the department that pings phones. Every day I was dealing with law enforcement that was talking about people who were walking away from home. And so it was so...
Silver alerts and
Yes,
things like that.
exactly. And here I was, we were not allowed to have our phones during work hours. I had to wait until I was on a break or at lunch. And so imagine the anxiety when I would call home and couldn't reach him.
Sure.
So I decided to take a couple of weeks off, and during those couple of weeks, I realized that he could no longer take care of himself, and so I decided to take the early retirement. I was 3 years away from retirement, and I realized that family came before anything else, and so that's what I did. But here's what happened. So the week before I retire, he had a fender bender. Thank God nobody was hurt, but his car was in the shop. During that time, I had a cousin who had had surgery and had had some complications and was now on life support.
Oh.
So many of my family members on my side were in town because of that. It was my mom's 85th birthday that week, and I asked my family to stay in town and let's all go to church as a family so that we could celebrate Mom, because Mom was now dealing with dementia as far as elderly, the elderly age and dementias we know.
Right, and it could have been a little bit as a result of the stroke that she had had.
Exactly. But I knew that she didn't recognize a lot of the family anymore, so I thought this would be a great way for the family to come together, support each other. So here's what happened. So we were all going to church the Sunday. The Saturday before, Carl decided that he wanted pizza, and I was running errands. He went to get pizza, and on his way back home, the pizza shop was probably about a mile and a half away from the house. He was used to driving there, so he walked there and then got hit by a car.
Carl got hit by a
Carl
car
got hit
walking.
by a car
Ay,
walking
ay, ay.
home
Oh, my
with
goodness.
the pizza.
Oh, my goodness.
So I happened to be in a store at the time when my phone rang. And of course, when we don't recognize the number, we don't answer the phone.
Right.
I saw it went to voicemail. I picked up the voicemail and I hear, "This is Deputy so-and-so. Please call me regarding your husband."
Your heart must have been in your stomach.
So I called the deputy and I heard two things. I heard your husband has been struck by a vehicle and trauma-hawked to St. Mary's. My cousin was with me. She said all she knows is that I just went down. And anyway, I had the presence of mind. I had to get to the accident scene, which was close to home. But that night changed my life forever, because when I got to St. Mary's, I had developed what I call a default statement by saying, "My husband is in the early stages of Alzheimer's." It felt very comfortable.
Okay.
And the nurse looked at me, who was doing, his history, and she said, "I knew that in the first 5 minutes." And it was like someone had just thrown cold water on me.
A wake-up call for you.
A wake-up call for me. He had a broken...
That you couldn't kind of soften the blow or
No.
soften the diagnosis by
No.
saying it the way that you said it, because obviously other people are seeing it within minutes.
It was real.
So that was a shock to you.
That was a shock. It was real. And so needless to say, they did emergency surgery. He had a broken... I think it was either tibia or fibia in his ankle, and surgery went well, but of course he needed several weeks of rehab after that. And so I still hadn't learned my lesson. I'm talking to one of the physical therapists in rehab one day, and again I said the comfortable statement, well, because she was telling me he wasn't being very cooperative. And again I said, well, he's in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And she looked at me and shook her head. So the wake-up call happened again.
Shook her head, meaning, no, he's not in the early stages anymore.
And so my reality was changing.
So you're seeing that, okay, we're past that. It's getting worse. This is progressive.
Yes.
So what's your plan going forward?
Well, long story short, he recovered very nicely.
That's good.
We're very, very blessed and very thankful for that. But what happened is he then, once he started walking again, started wandering away from home. So that was the next dilemma that I had to deal with. I was very thankful that the Veterans Administration suggested that I get in touch with Alzheimer's Community Care, which I'm now part of their family. And I'm very thankful because they have a program called ID Locator that's a bracelet that if you have a loved one that walks away from home, they can track them. And so we've been able to use that very successfully 3 different times.
So he has gotten out, but he had the bracelet on,
Yes.
so then they located
They
him?
located
before
him.
he got in
Yes.
trouble again?
Yes. And to show you how important that bracelet has been is that my mom passed away last year, and so
Sorry.
several members of his family suggested that I take a little time away. They had a timeshare in Mexico and invited me down. And as I was in Mexico, I got a call. He was in a rehab, and we thought very safe. And I got a call saying that he was walking away, and I needed to return pronto, so that otherwise they were going to have to take drastic steps. So I came back early, and I've learned 2 things now with my journey. Whenever I have to place him, because one of the things I've learned is I need respite from time to time in order to be a capable caregiver. I have to, everyone always says to me, you have to take care of yourself. But the things that I need to know is it has to be a locked facility and it has to be a memory care. And so when I'm talking to other caregivers who are going through the same thing, I very readily share my experiences because I feel that that's the only way that we can learn is to pass on the information. Carl is doing amazingly well.
Good. Glad to hear that, considering. Yes.
And we've come full circle as far as family support. His sisters have been amazing. He just celebrated his birthday, and they all came in to celebrate his birthday with him.
So everybody's on board now. The family, they've all been informed, and everybody's there to lend
on
their
both
support.
sides, my
That's
side
wonderful.
and his side. And we're feeling very blessed again because at the beginning of our marriage, we had the full support of both sides of the family. And you know how when you know that you've come full circle is when I was able to just during his birthday, we had invited some friends over, and I could just see the interaction again, and it was just thankfulness and gratitude. And quite honestly, as you know, having dealt with so many of these stories, it's a very random situation. The toughest part that I've had to deal with is there are no benchmarks. No one can give you a nice little chart and say, well, in 6 months, expect this to happen.
Right. You don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. So what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? Do you have any fears?
I would say yes, and I think it's normal. It's common for anyone in my situation. But again, I rely on my faith, and I instead of focusing on the fears and the anxiety, I focus on the little blessings. The fact that even though he at times is a very different person, and I heard you talking before I joined the conversation about how sometimes they can be combative, and I see it all. Within an hour, you will see every shade of the spectrum. You will go from feeling, yes, this is my life partner, who I love and who loves me and is very loving and gentle, to all of a sudden him saying to you, I can't stand you, which is very hurtful. But then this is not the person that I love. This is a disease.
So how did you learn to accept that for the disease and not take it personally? Because that's not easy to do.
I try to stay up on education as far as the disease and talk. And I'm a talker. So, I try to just make myself available and open to information. The ACC has been just wonderful. The trip that we took to Tallahassee was probably one of the most compelling things that I've done. Because I think as a caregiver, sometimes you feel just helpless. Mm-hmm. And that trip, being able to talk to the legislatures and advocate on for Alzheimer's community care and just know that I was doing something positive by telling my story has made me feel that I'm not just sitting around waiting for something to happen.
That's wonderful. That's a great attitude that you have. So let me ask you this. If we had a magic lamp right here, and you could rub it and you would be granted 3 wishes, what would you wish for?
One of them I do see from time to time, and I want to be able to always look in his eyes and see my husband. And so every now and then I see glimpses of his personality. He's very social, and so, we walk into Publix, and he thinks he knows everybody, and he says, "Hi, don't I know you?" And I smile, and I think, in spite of it all, look what we still have. So yes, I hope that I still can rub that genie and get that. And I think he knows who I am, but I know one day that can change. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably, as a caregiver, one of the toughest things that you deal with. And the third thing is to continue to have the love and the support from family. And just recently, one of his nieces, she was in town visiting her dad, and she wanted to see him. And so what I did was I let him go to dinner with her at a restaurant and just said, you know what? Spend some time with your Uncle Carl for a little while. And just to see his eyes light up and his face light up, even though I can tell he's starting not to know everybody's name anymore. Mm-hmm. But I just want to continue seeing that light in his eyes.
And giving him the joy that he can still hold while he still can.
Yes.
Yeah. And what would you say to a caregiver now that you've been this far on your journey and you've many years of dealing with all the trials and tribulations? What would you say to a brand new caregiver if today, they said, Lorette, what is the most important thing I need to know?
I would say don't forget to breathe. And I expected you to chuckle on that, but a lot of times, and I will say one of the things that I think has helped me is I was a sales trainer. That was a very recent career for me. And I think it's helped because when I look at adult learning theory and how adults learn, a lot of times in talking to my own husband, I step back and I say, if this was not my loved one, how would I speak to them? And so I think the suggestion that I can pass on is sometimes remove yourself from the situation and pretend you're talking to somebody else that you don't know. Because what happens is we forget with loved ones to be loving, to be kind, and to be patient. And I think if we can just sometimes just treat that loved one as if you're taking care of someone else's loved one, it kind of helps.
Oh, absolutely. That is such great advice. It's wonderful advice. I can't express how grateful I am to you for coming and sharing your story. It's not, yes, some of it is in your head, but the most of it is in your heart, and sharing what you feel and what you've gone through and the way that you've gracefully gone through the journey so far, because it's not an easy journey.
It's not. Mm-mm. It's not. And so that's why I said don't forget to breathe. Mm-hmm. Because there are times when something happens and I stop and I take a deep breath and I say, okay.
Literally. Because when I asked you that question, you came right with it. Don't forget to breathe. So it sounds like you've told a lot of people that.
And I practice what I preach, because what happens is when you take that deep breath, you're able to say, okay, my reality has changed once again.
Yes.
And I can't look back to what happened yesterday, because it's the now. It's the here and now. And so when you take that deep breath, you're shocked, because it could be, you talked about incontinence. That's very real. And
you deal with it as it comes.
You
It's
deal
what you're
with
doing.
it as right. Mm-hmm. And we were taking a trip on the turnpike with two friends from church who are just probably two of the dearest people that I know, because we had a situation where he said, I need to go to the bathroom. And I thought, okay, let's just look for a rest area. And things came fast. And I was not prepared. I had never dealt with anything
And that
like
was the first
before.
time he had an accident.
That was the first time.
So you're like, okay, this is a new chapter now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Marsha, I went into the men's room. I yelled out, I said, woman in the men's room, because I knew that I had to take care of my husband. And one of the things that I want to make sure that he always has is his dignity.
Yeah. And you've got to do what you have to do, as the caregiver and the wife.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Laurette, so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. Thank you, and good luck to you and to Carl. And many blessings hopefully will come your way on the rest of your journey.
Much appreciated.
And I want to thank you all for joining in also, because we're here for you. And just like you heard Laurette in her story, learn from caregivers, learn from the professionals that we bring your way. I'll go ahead and offer this 36-hour day book and thank our national sponsor for this, Arden Court's Memory Care Community. It's our national sponsor. This book is yours free. All you have to do is call the toll-free number of 888-478-2410, 888-478-2410 to get the free 36-hour day book. So we'll be back next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, give somebody a hug, because they need it and so do you. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marsha Teal. Join us next week as Marsha, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.